Hello and welcome to Tier 2 of the Genshin Impact Iceberg. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend watching the previous video covering the first tier of the iceberg, especially if you're unfamiliar with Genshin Impact and what an iceberg is. Tier 1 was surface level and covered a lot of topics about Genshin's basic mechanics and storyline, but Tier 2 is going to have much less gameplay topics and a lot more topics about lore. So if you're more of a lore person, this tier will be more your speed than the previous one. Since I already introduced pretty much everything in the previous video, I'm going to keep this intro pretty short and just dive right into it. If you find yourself getting overwhelmed or confused about the information being presented to you, I definitely recommend taking a break from the video and watching it in multiple sittings because this is a very long video, by far the longest video I have ever made, and it is a lot of information, a bucket load, and I do not at all expect people to take all of this in one sitting. The topics in this tier are still relatively basic, but are much less beginner-friendly. You'll likely be familiar with these topics if you're a relatively avid Genshin player, especially if you've been playing for at least a few months. Also, huge shout out to the Genshin Wiki for compiling so much information in a concise manner. It was a huge help in the creation of this iceberg explanation video, so thank you to all of the contributors. Pretty much anything I said in the intro of the previous video applies here, so if you need to go rewatch that intro, go watch it, but otherwise we're just gonna dive right into this. Leaks. If you're familiar with pretty much any part of the entertainment industry, chances are you know what leaks are. In case you don't, leaks refer to private data and information from a company and/or a project, which may include screenshots, videos, documents, and pretty much anything that's not meant to be displayed to the public. One large example within the gaming industry is the Grand Theft Auto 6 leak, where footage and screenshots of an early build of the game got released to the public without the game company's authorization. Genshin Impact has been a victim of leaks, quite frankly, since the game was released, and leaks are rampant to this very day. Hackers and data miners are able to take advantage of the game's beta releases by using private servers to farm data. Genshin Impact, since its release, opened their betas for external testing and collects a large number of beta testers to provide feedback for the game's development. Because of this huge amount of playtesters, it's inevitable that people are going to take advantage of these early releases to leak out information to the public. The most common information that gets leaked from Genshin is future playable characters. Usually, characters a version or two ahead of the current released version will get leaked from the beta, and leakers will provide information and footage of that character. Sometimes, character designs in future regions will get leaked too if data miners get lucky enough. Regions such as Sumeru and Fontaine had a good portion of their cast leaked to the public before almost anything was released about the regions officially from Hoyoverse. Ultimately, leaks are incredibly common for Hoyoverse games. They also occur for their other games, such as Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero. Hoyoverse has stated that leaked information goes against their terms of service, but they have taken limited action to eliminate these leaks from the public, and a large part of that is likely just due to the volume of leaks that get released online, which makes it hard to enforce. Some people online have theorized that Hoyoverse allows leaks to exist since it generates extra hype for future patches and allows them to make changes if feedback is negative, but personally, I think that's pretty unlikely. Leakers who have gotten caught have had legal action taken on them previously, or at the very least have had their accounts terminated. There's subreddits dedicated to leaks, and they get posted on social media such as TikTok and Twitter pretty much all the time, making them very hard to avoid and very hard to get rid of. Some people enjoy leaks so they can prepare for future patches, and some people don't since it spoils the anticipation and fun. Hoyoverse, luckily, is able to keep some of their content away from leaks, such as their gameplay trailers, animations, and certain events and parts of the game that stay away from the beta releases. Genshin webcomic. From November 2018 to January 2020, Genshin Impact released 13 chapters of manga on their official website and on Webtoon. 3 more chapters were created, making 16 chapters in total, but the final 3 chapters have not been released in English. This manga was primarily created to promote the release of Genshin while introducing the world of Teyvat to interested players before the game's release in September 2020. The manga takes place before the game's main plot, following the main Mondstadt cast and characters that would be introduced much later in the game, such as Kale and Ildatore of the Fatui harbingers. Originally, I was going to give a plot summary of the manga, but then I realized that that's 16 chapters worth of plot condensed into one entry, and that's a lot for one entry in this iceberg, so personally, I'm just going to recommend that you read it, especially if you're a fan of Genshin and Genshin's lore. It's definitely a worthwhile read. The plot covers a lot of lore that's only mentioned in the game and not really shown, such as Diluc and Kaya's backstories, Vanessa, whom is the first Grand Master of the Knights of Favonius, the Fatui and their purpose in Mondstadt, along with an early look at Ildatore. You'll also get a little bit of insight on Kale and Sino, who would later show up in the Sumeru region of Genshin Impact. Although the manga only lasted for 16 chapters, the manga still sees love from the fandom to this day. Fatui harbingers. The Fatui harbingers of Genshin Impact are the powerful enforcers of the Tsaritsa's will, weaving chaos and ambition across Teyvat. Each of the 11 harbingers is a high-ranking member of the Fatui, a wealthy and politically influential elite granted incredible power through delusions and divine authority by the Tsaritsa, the Archon and ruler of Khaenri'ah. Let's talk about each member in order. Pierro, the Jester. Pierro is the director of the Fatui harbingers, along with being the first ever Fatui harbinger. Although much about him is a mystery, we do know that he was once a royal mage of Khaenri'ah, and was even an ally of the Traveler's sibling for a time. Though Pierro rarely steps into the spotlight, his presence looms large, as every Fatui scheme traces back to his meticulous planning. With an unshakable resolve and unmatched intellect, Pierro remains a cornerstone of the Fatui's power and one of Teyvat's most dangerous players. We have not seen him in-game yet, but his reputation is undeniably intriguing, and I'm sure we're going to see him much later in the game. Il Capitano, the Captain. Il Capitano is the first of the 11 Fatui harbingers, and is widely regarded for his combat prowess and leadership skills. Once a proud commander in Khaenri'ah, Capitano bore witness to the cataclysm that destroyed his homeland, leaving him scarred by the sight of his people, family, and comrades succumbing to the abyss. Realizing the hopelessness of the battle, Capitano led the remnants of his platoon to safety in Natlan. Here, mistrusted by the locals due to the stigma against Khaenri'ahs, he found an unlikely ally in Iyuzu, chief of the Masters of the Nightwind. Together, they waged relentless battles against the Abyss, forging a bond of respect and camaraderie. However, Iyuzu's eventual death deepened Capitano's wounds, driving his resolve even further. Cursed with immortality like all pure-blooded Khaenri'ahs, Capitano carried the weight of countless souls absorbed into his heart, an alchemical modification tied to the ley lines. Seeking peace for these souls and redemption for his nation's fall, he joined the Fatui as the first of the harbingers. His tenure with the Fatui brought him into contact with other key figures like Pierro, Signora, and Dottore, though Capitano remained a figure of quiet strength, his loyalty unwavering even amidst internal conflicts. We crossed paths with Capitano while entering the nation of Natlan, Capitano becoming a significant force amidst the chaos. Experimenting with phlogiston and searching for Sitlali, he encountered resistance from the Archon Mavwika and the Traveler. Despite setbacks, Capitano revealed his goal: to reconstruct Natlan's ley lines and prevent the nation from sharing Khaenri'ah's grim fate. Though his plans were controversial and nearly disastrous for the Fatui, Capitano ultimately chose to align with Mavwika's vision for a better future. Capitano's final act cemented his legacy as a tragic hero. Confronting Renova, one of the Four Shades, whom we'll talk about later in the Iceberg, he offered himself as a replacement for Mavwika, willingly embracing his immortality to shield Natlan from further destruction. This act of self-sacrifice unraveled his immortal essence, transferring it to Yuhaltakuten to safeguard the Lord of the Night. Capitano's consciousness was sent to the Night Kingdom, leaving his body seated upon the throne of the Primal Fire, a solemn reminder of his enduring commitment to the people. After the invasion was repelled, Capitano's valor was commemorated by Natlan's people with a monument near the Masters of the Nightwind. It is unsure if we will see Capitano's return in the future, but many players have speculated his return as a grand possibility. Il Dottore, the Doctor. Il Dottore is the second of the Fatui harbingers and is widely regarded as one of the most sinister members. Dottore has made appearances both in-game and in the game's manga. Dottore's descent into infamy began during his time at the Sumeru Academia. Obsessed with creating enhanced humans capable of surpassing even the gods, his unconventional methods and moral disregard quickly earned him a reputation as a monster and madman. Though expelled from the Academia, his early exploits involved discovering advanced technology in Gurabad and Ardravi Valley, which fueled his unrelenting ambition. His dubious experiments, including dissecting a colleague who died under mysterious circumstances, raised enough eyebrows to get him expelled. Yet for Zandik, his original name, rejection only fanned the flames of his scientific pursuits. After being expelled, Dottore found an unlikely ally in Pierro, the first harbinger. Offered the resources to pursue his twisted experiments, he joined the Fatui and embraced his new identity as Il Dottore, or the Doctor. This title is both ironic and chillingly appropriate, given his experiments with Eliezer patients, ruined machine technology, and even children. His work left trails of trauma, such as Kale's painful experiments with God's remains. His most proud achievement? Creating multiple segments of himself, replicas of his body at different ages, to provide alternate perspectives and more brainpower for his work. Dottore's intellect has wreaked havoc upon multiple regions in Teyvat. In Inazuma, he infiltrated Tatarasuna under the alias Escher, sabotaging the Mikage furnace and manipulating Scaramouche, A's discarded puppet, into a pawn of the Fatui. In Mondstadt, he crushed the monstrous Ursa the Drake single-handedly, using it to extort influence and establish Fatui dominance. Even Sumeru wasn't spared his machinations. He manipulated the Akasha system to entrap Nahida and nearly succeeded in creating a god by modifying Scaramouche. Dottoro's experiments show his dark genius knows no bounds. His fascination with the Aranara, Sumeru's dream-wielding creatures, led him to exploit children in an attempt to weaponize dreams and the Withering. His ruthlessness was on full display in the negotiations with Nahida. He traded A's electronosis for the destruction of his other segments, and revealed tantalizing hints about the nature of Teyvat's skies, claiming they were a lie. We'll get back to this later. Despite his intellect, Dottore is no stranger to sowing discord. His relationships with other harbingers are fraught with tension, Arlecchino openly despising his experiments, and even among allies, his methods invite unease. It is very likely we'll see more of Dottore in future patches, especially as we begin to enter Snezhnaya. Columbina, the Damselette. Columbina is the third of the Fatui harbingers and a character which we know very little about at this point in the game. Despite her soft-spoken and unassuming presence, Columbina's rank as the third harbinger is no coincidence. Her power rivals the gods themselves, making her a force of nature despite appearing harmless. No one quite understands the true extent of her abilities, which only adds to the terror she inspires among her peers. Arlecchino, the Knave. Arlecchino is the fourth of the Fatui harbingers. Arlecchino runs the House of the Hearth, a haven for Teyvat's orphan children. Though she appears cold and authoritarian, she passionately protects her children and works to shield them from harm. This maternal, well, paternal, instinct stems from her own tormented past. Once an orphan herself, Arlecchino grew up under the rule of Crucibina, the previous head of the House of the Hearth and the previous knave, who subjected children to unthinkable cruelty. Forced to fight for survival and watch others be used as guinea pigs for Dottoro's experiments, young Arlecchino, then known as Khaenri'ah, developed a steely resolve to rise above her circumstances. After a tragic series of events, including the death of her closest friend Khaenri'ah, Khaenri'ah overthrew Crucibina, claiming the title of father and becoming a Fatui harbinger. But Arlecchino's leadership marked a departure from her predecessor's cruelty. While she remains strict and unyielding, she is also merciful in unexpected ways. Traitors are not killed, but erased, given new identities and allowed to live free of the Fatui's grip. To her, loyalty is not blind obedience, but something deeper, a sentiment that sets her apart from other harbingers. Arlecchino's fellow harbingers distrust her, branding her violent and unhinged, a reputation she cleverly uses to her advantage. She maintains a polite, professional facade while harboring a disdain for the Fatui's more questionable practices, as we previously mentioned with Dottore. Her willingness to betray the Tsaritsa if their goals diverge hints at her deeper ambitions and a potential rebellion against the organization that she serves. Despite this, Arlecchino remains a force to be reckoned with. Her story quest features a jaw-dropping showdown where she effortlessly defeats the Traveler and their allies, showcasing her immense power. Yet, even in victory, she surprises everyone by sparing the lives of those she could have easily destroyed. This act of mercy, along with her efforts to dismantle the House of the Hearth's darker traditions, suggests that Arlecchino is trying to create a better future, albeit in her own ruthless way. Pulcinella, the Rooster. Pulcinella is the fifth of the Fatui harbingers. Beneath his unassuming role as the mayor of a city in Snezhnaya lies a master manipulator whose seemingly altruistic decisions often hide self-serving motives. Pulcinella first steps into the spotlight when he inducts Tartaglia, aka Ajax, into the Fatui. After Tartaglia's harrowing experience in the Abyss left him with otherworldly combat skills and a penchant for chaos, Pulcinella saw potential where others saw a menace. After the Hydronosis is retrieved by Arlecchino, Pulcinella joins forces with Pantalone for a mysterious endeavor known as Project Stuja. Using the House of the Hearth as a key player, the project appears to be an effort to consolidate power within the Fatui and tighten the reins on unpredictable elements like Arlecchino. To some, he's a brilliant leader and strategist who always sees the bigger picture. To others, he's a heartless opportunist willing to sacrifice even his own people to achieve his goals. Even within the Fatui, his peers harbor a mix of respect and suspicion towards him. Arlecchino, for instance, openly dislikes him, although she dislikes mostly everybody, claiming that the rumors of her own ruthlessness stem from Pulcinella's meddling. We have yet to encounter Pulcinella within the game, but it is very likely he'll be making an appearance sooner than later. Scaramouche, the Balladeer. Scaramouche was once the sixth of the Fatui harbingers. However, in events that would happen during the Sumeru chapter, Scaramouche would erase himself from history and change his identity to the Wanderer. Scaramouche was created by Rite, the Electro Archon of Inazuma, as a prototype for a puppet that could inherit her power and rule the nation in her stead. However, A ultimately deemed him unsuitable for the task. When she saw that the puppet shed tears in his sleep, she decided to spare him from a cruel fate, sealing away his godly power and leaving him to live freely. Unfortunately, what A saw as mercy, Scaramouche saw as rejection. Believing he had been abandoned as a failure, he began his journey with a heavy heart and only a single memento, a golden feather gifted by the very Archon who cast him aside. Adrift in the world, the puppet, then nameless, was discovered by Katsuragi, a loyal subordinate of Mikoshi Nagamasa. Dubbed the Kabukimono, he found a brief sense of belonging among the people of Tatarasuna. However, this peace was shattered when Dottore, disguised as Escher, manipulated events to poison the Mikage furnace with corrupted crystal marrow, killing many of the people. The Kabukimono's trust in humanity crumbled when Dottore gave him a mysterious box containing a withered human heart, claiming it belonged to a subordinate Niwa had killed, Niwa being a man Kabukimono had admired. In reality, however, Dottore had murdered Niwa himself. Overcome with grief and anger at what he believed was betrayal, the Kabukimono left Tatarasuna, marking his second great betrayal. Later, a boy he befriended and promised to live with as family succumbed to illness, breaking his promise. This third and final betrayal solidified Scaramouche's bitterness towards the world, leaving him to wander in Inazuma with a heart hardened by sorrow. Eventually, Scaramouche was found by Pierrot, the first of the Fatui harbingers, who invited him to join their ranks. Tempted by Pierrot's words of rebellion against the gods, Scaramouche unlocked the power sealed within him, becoming the sixth harbinger, the Balladeer. As a harbinger, Scaramouche was a force to be reckoned with. He orchestrated manipulations that toppled entire schools of Inazuman bladesmithing and assisted with Fatui expeditions into the abyss. Scaramouche's descent into infamy culminated in his appearance in Sumeru, where he sought to ascend to godhood as Shoki no Kami. After years of bitterness and ambition, he believed becoming a god would fill the void left by his past betrayals. However, he was ultimately defeated by the Traveler and Nahida, the Dendro Archon, who revealed the truth about Tatarasuna. Dottore had orchestrated everything and Niwa was an innocent victim. Crushed by the realization that his life's anguish had been shaped by lies, Scaramouche made a desperate choice. Using the power of Irminsul, he erased all traces of his existence from the world's collective memory, seeking to undo the pain that he had caused and endured. Yet, even in erasing himself, he found that he still existed, no longer as Scaramouche, but as the Wanderer. The Wanderer is now a passive and playable character who usually resides in Sumeru, and a friend to the Traveler. Sandrone, Marionette. Sandrone is the seventh of the Fatui harbingers. Sandrone's world revolves around her mechanical creations, which she treats with more respect than she shows most humans. While the other Fatui harbingers plot grand schemes or engage in power plays, Sandrone is almost always consumed by her research. Her preferred ride being a heavily modified ruin machine that she's transformed into her own personal throne. Described by Tartaglia as having a terrible personality, Sandrone doesn't exactly ooze charm. Sandrone's story takes an even darker turn when it's implied that she became involved with Mosso Lombroso, a controversial figure known for his mechanical creation, Curve. In Fontaine, when Curve sacrificed itself to save the Traveler, Paimon, and Talochard, Sandrone's reaction was anything but forgiving. Her involvement in the aftermath is veiled in mystery, but one thing is clear. Those who cross her or meddle with her work meet gruesome fates. Take Jenk, for example, one of Mosso's associates. After Curve's destruction, Jenk was found in the opera Epiclese, his mind broken, tongue cut out, and body left trussed like a puppet. Whether this was an act of vengeance or twisted justice, it bears Sandrone's unmistakable signature of cruelty. Despite not appearing in the game yet, Sandrone has proven to be a ruthless character, and someone the Traveler will have to take caution with. La Signora, the Fair Lady. Once upon a time in the city of Mondstadt, a young maiden named Rosaline fell deeply in love with a man named Rostam. Their love seemed destined for a bright future, until the cataclysm struck and fate ripped them apart. When Signora returned to Mondstadt after studying at the Sumeru Academia, she learned that Rostam had fallen in battle. Consumed by grief and anger, she vowed to use her newfound power to cleanse the world's crookedness, thus transforming her into the fearsome Crimson Witch of Flame. Rumors swirled that Signora abandoned her mortal form and allowed liquid fire to flow through her veins, a transformation that left her face and body burned and scarred. Her once beautiful form was now a terrifying image of rage and sorrow, and though she only burned monsters and demons, the people began to fear her as well. This fiery figure was no longer the woman who sang with love in her heart. she was now a living inferno, hell-bent on purging the world of its imperfections. La Signora is the 8th Fatui Harbinger, and the first Harbinger we encounter in the game. Signora's path would cross with the travelers at pivotal moments in Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma, each time revealing a deeper layer of her scheming nature. In Mondstadt, she was behind the theft of the Holy Lyre der Himmel, aiming to draw out Barbados, aka Venti, and take the Animo Archon's Gnosis. After a quick ambush outside Mondstadt Cathedral, she left both Venti and the Traveler unconscious, securing her objective and disappearing without a trace. In Liyue, Signora played a more subdued role, acting as the liaison between Zhongli and the Tsaritsa. She was instrumental in securing the Gnosis of Morax, which she later took back to Snezhnaya after Tartaglia's mission failed to sway Zhongli into joining the Fatui's cause. Signora's most shocking moment, no pun intended, came when she traveled to Inazuma, plotting once again to secure a Gnosis, this time from the Rite Shogun. After manipulating events in the nation and handing over the Fatui's plan to Scaramouche, Signora encountered the Traveler in Tenshukaku. What followed was a legendary duel between the two, with Signora temporarily discarding her cryo-delusion to reveal the full power of the Crimson Witch of Embers. But despite her fiery transformation, the Traveler proved too much for her, and Signora was defeated. As the rules of the duel dictated, she was to be executed by the Raiden Shogun's Muso no Hitotachi, and in the final moments of her life, Signora's facade crumbled. She flew into a frantic rage, charging at the Raiden Shogun, only to be sliced into ashes, her body dissolving into nothingness. Signora's death sent shockwaves through the Fatui. Her subordinates, especially those in Inazuma, were furious, while others across the world awaited word on who would rise to replace her. In Snezhnaya, the remaining Harbingers mourned her loss, with Pulcinella decreeing a half-day of mourning for the fallen fair lady. What Signora didn't know was that her pursuit of the Gnosis had been in vain. By the time she encountered the Raiden Shogun, Yae Miko revealed that A had already given her Gnosis away centuries ago, long before Signora even set foot in Inazuma. The Gnosis had been exchanged for the Traveler's life, which had been at Scaramouche's mercy. This revelation only added to the tragedy of Signora's fate, as her final moments were spent chasing a lost cause. Similarly to Capitano, many players have speculated La Signora's return. Pantalone, Regrator. Pantalone is the 9th of the 11th Fatui Harbingers. If you ever find yourself wondering who the wealthiest Harbinger is, look no further than Pantalone. Not only does he control Snezhnaya's economic policies, but his riches are practically limitless. He's so wealthy that he paid for the exclusive use of Mondstadt's Goth Grand Hotel up front. Yes, you heard that correctly, up front. We're talking about a luxury hotel being rented indefinitely, no questions asked. But Pantalone's wealth isn't just about flaunting his riches, it's part of his master plan. He's on a mission to make Snezhnaya the heart that pumps money around the world, and possibly even replace Mora as the currency of Teyvat. That's right, he's not just after profit. He wants complete control over the world's economy. If anyone can do it, it's Pantalone. His grand schemes, backed by enormous sums of money, could indeed shake the very core of the world. Imagine being born into a world where the gods control everything, even the very currency that drives nations. That's exactly the childhood Pantalone had, and it didn't sit well with him. Denied a vision, he grew resentful for the gods and their monopolies on resources like Mora. Instead of sulking in his poverty, Pantalone turned his frustration into ambition, obsessing over the concept of fair exchange and dreaming of a day where humans could hold power over gods and their riches. Working alongside the Fatui's brilliant but mad scientist, the Doctor, Pantalone aims to create an artificial god, a being that could rival the divine powers in Teyvat. Perhaps this is why he's collaborating on the mysterious Project Stuja with Pulcinella, a fellow Harbinger. Unlike many of his peers, Pantalone is firmly planted in Snezhnaya, the heart of the Fatui, and it's here where he cultivates his influence and wealth, and where we will likely encounter him in the game. Tartaglia, Child. And finally, we have number 11 of the Fatui Harbingers, and the guy that everyone says that I sound like, Tartaglia, aka Ajax. Born as a timid, hesitant child named Ajax, Tartaglia's transformation started after a fateful encounter with the Abyss. As a kid, he dreamed of being an adventurer, much like the ones his father used to tell stories about as they fished together, but things didn't go according to plan. One day, while out in the woods, Ajax was attacked by wolves and fell into the Abyss, a mysterious and perilous place where time operates differently. 1 month spent in the Abyss equals 1 day in the human realm. There he met Skirk, who took him under his wing, training him with brutal intensity. 3 days later, in the outside world, he emerged from the Abyss, stronger, more confident, and perhaps a bit more dangerous. After his time in the Abyss, Ajax returned home only to find that his family had noticed a significant change. He was no longer the scared boy who ran away. Instead, he was a bloodthirsty warrior, craving battle like an addict craves their next fix. His father, seeing the raw power in his son, enlisted him into the Fatui. Pulcinella, seeing Tartaglia's potential, took him in under the pretense of punishment for his intense behaviors. Due to his ferocity and skill in combat, Ajax quickly rose through the ranks and eventually became the youngest harbinger in the Fatui, taking the 11th spot, though it wasn't because of a lack of strength. It's because the harbingers aren't ranked by just power, but also by the tasks they handle and their loyalty. Don't let his love for battle fool you. Tartaglia is fiercely loyal to those he cares about. He holds an unwavering devotion to the Tsaritsa, seeing himself as her ultimate weapon in the war for power. He is also deeply devoted to his family, especially his younger siblings. Tartaglia is proud of his family, often sending them money, letters, and gifts. His love for his youngest brother, Tusser, is especially notable. He's willing to go to extreme lengths just to see Tusser happy. When you first encounter Tartaglia in Liyue, it's not exactly under the best circumstances. You witness the death of Rex Lapis, and Tartaglia is there, but not for any friendly reason. He's after Zhongli's Gnosis, a key item of immense value to the Fatui. After a quick battle with the Traveler, he's left furious when he realizes the Gnosis isn't where he thought it was. Tartaglia's pride is wounded, and he doesn't take too kindly to being outplayed. We encounter Tartaglia again briefly during an event in Inazuma, in which he temporarily joins us as an ally. Finally, we meet him again in Fontaine, where Tartaglia gets caught up in a conspiracy involving disappearing women, a mystery that, naturally, is connected to his dealings with a primordial whale from another world, aka the Abyss. In an unexpected twist, Tartaglia gets arrested and sent to jail for the women's disappearance. While that sounds like a major setback, Tartaglia isn't exactly the jailbird type. He escapes the prison of Meropide, fights the whale, and passes out from exhaustion, before being saved by none other than Skirk, his old master from the Abyss. After being sent to Snezhnaya, we see him once more in Arlecchino's story quest, where he is seen looking for Skirk and reveals to us that his next role as a harbinger is an unknown duty involving the previously mentioned Project Sthuja. Although this was the last time we saw Tartaglia, it definitely will not be the last. And that covers all of the Fatui Harbingers. I know, it was a lot of information, but I hope you got some enjoyment learning about each Harbinger and their backstory. Khaenri'ah and the Cataclysm. Khaenri'ah and the Cataclysm. I would argue that this is the centerpiece of Genshin Impact lore, as there is so much connected to this. Before continuing on this topic, let me make it abundantly clear that there is much vagueness and speculation surrounding this event, meaning that the canon of what occurred during the fall of Khaenri'ah is not completely clear. Little is known about Khaenri'ah in modern-day Teyvat, so most of the information we've gathered about Khaenri'ah has been collected through books, artifact and weapon lore, and most importantly, Dainsleif, who we'll talk about shortly. To avoid mass confusion, I'll mainly focus on talking about the main confirmed events and outcomes of the Cataclysm, and trust me, we're going to be returning to this event several times throughout this iceberg. Khaenri'ah is a destroyed civilization within Genshin Impact, whose destruction is part of an event referred to as the Cataclysm. Khaenri'ah was a prosperous nation built deep underground by humankind, said to have advanced technological and alchemical breakthroughs. Khaenri'ah was separated from the Teyvat continent, along with having no celestial jurisdiction. One massive discovery sourced from Khaenri'ah is the art of Chemia, which is the ability to create synthetic life. This, alongside other forbidden knowledge, proved to be the main cause of Khaenri'ah's downfall. 5 Khaenri'ans are primarily noted for being the main contributors to the fall of Khaenri'ah, and they are known as the 5 Sinners of Khaenri'ah. It is largely thought that these 5 sinners obtained forbidden knowledge from the Abyss that could bring about the destruction of Teyvat. One extremely notable alchemist and researcher and one of the 5 sinners, Rhine used this power to create all types of creatures and monsters, most significantly her perfect synthetic human creation, Albedo, who was created after the Cataclysm, and the dragon Durin, who attacked Mondstadt during the Cataclysm. So here's when things get fun, because we have contradicting information on how the Cataclysm started. One popular belief is that Rhine creations caused destruction throughout Khaenri'ah and Teyvat. As to why they would do this is, well, completely unknown. But some people speculate that they became corrupted and went rogue, or that there may have been conflict within Khaenri'ah that caused Rhine to retaliate using her powerful creatures. Regardless, this prompted the Celestials and the Archons to attack and destroy Khaenri'ah. Another belief is that Celestia attacked Khaenri'ah first, causing Reindotir to send her creatures throughout Teyvat to wreak havoc as revenge. Although it isn't entirely clear what caused the cataclysm to begin, what we do know is that creatures from Khaenri'ah caused a massive amount of destruction throughout Teyvat, attacking each nation and leaving them in disarray. Although the Archons prevailed over the forces of Khaenri'ah, there were many casualties, including some of the original Archons such as Electro-Archon Rite and Makoto and Hydro-Archon Egeria. Celestia and the Archons punished Khaenri'ah by destroying their land and cursing their people. Pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns were cursed with immortality, although their physical forms would still erode with time, one prime example being Capitano of the Fatui harbingers. Other Khaenri'ahns were cursed with becoming the creatures that would make up the Abyss Order and also Hilichurls. Both the Abyss Order and the Fatui were created as a result of the cataclysm. There is much more information surrounding Khaenri'ah and the cataclysm, but it's best to just leave that for the rest of the iceberg so this entry doesn't get overwhelming. Other topics such as the Alberics, the other 5 sinners, and more will be discussed later in the iceberg. Archon War. The Archon War is arguably one of the most important chapters in Teyvat's history, as it gave rise to the modern Archon power structure that is seen in the game now. Imagine this. Gods, demigods, and spirits from all corners of the world battling for supremacy, survival, and their ideals, reshaping Teyvat in the process. It was a chaotic clash driven by the allure of the 7 divine seats in Celestia, a mysterious prize that promised immense power and influence over humanity's future. Some gods joined the fray seeking glory, others fought to protect their territories, and a few simply struggled to shield mortals from the devastation. Ultimately, only 7 Archons emerged victorious, each claiming dominion over one of Teyvat's elemental nations. Yet, their victories were not without cost. Defeated gods either perished, fled to the Dark Sea, which we'll talk about soon, or were transformed into bitter remnants of their former glory. Some, like Boreas and Mondstadt, accepted defeat gracefully and became loyal allies to the new order. Others, like Osial, became sealed threats to be reckoned with later. But why the war began remains an unanswered question, fueling endless speculation. The Archon War is shrouded in mystery, especially in terms of what exactly caused it and the exact logistics of the war as well. I mean, it happened 2,000 plus years ago, while the Cataclysm happened 500 years ago, and we barely even know anything about that, so that should give you an idea of how little we really know about the truth of the Archon War. Although knowledge about the Archon War is not fully pieced together, we do have bits and pieces of information amongst all the different regions of Teyvat, so we'll brief over each region and how they were affected by this war. Also, it's important to note that although the Archon War is said to have been approximately 2,600 years ago, it lasted for centuries, and each region of Teyvat dealt with their own struggles at different times and not concurrently with each other. Starting with Mondstadt, the land was an icy wasteland caught in a clash between Khaenri'ah, the oppressive god of storms, and Boreas, the fierce king of the North Wind. Meanwhile, a nameless wisp of wind, Barbados, befriended a young bard who dreamed of freedom from Khaenri'ah's tyrannical rule. Together, they inspired a rebellion, rallying the disillusioned citizens of Khaenri'ah's storm-locked city. Their efforts ultimately toppled the god of storms, but not without heartbreaking losses. Barbados ascended as the Anemo Archon, taking on the form of his bard buddy, transforming Mondstadt into a free land and becoming one of Teyvat's most beloved Archons. Boreas, recognizing his icy storms could only destroy, willingly withdrew, becoming a guardian spirit of Wolvendom. Just so you're aware, we're going to cover this exact story again, just with a bit more detail in its own entry very soon. Liyue, under the steadfast rule of Morax, the Geo-Archon, was a land forged in blood and stone. Side by side with allies like Guizhong, the god of dust, Morax defeated countless rival gods, including serpents like Orobashi and sea monsters like Osial. Morax was ruthless and is speculated to be the most powerful god in all of Teyvat. This man was chucking mountains at people. Although nowadays, he's kind of just a tired old man. The main plot in Liyue is literally just him faking his own death so he can retire. Tragedy struck when Guizhong perished in battle, and Morax established Liyue Harbor in her honor. As a protector, Morax wielded immense power to secure the region, but even he could not prevent the horrors of karmic debt, which plagued the Yaksha, his loyal demon-hunting adepti. To this day, Zhao remains the last Yaksha standing, haunted by the war's lingering aftermath. Inazuma's role in the Archon War remains buried, as there's very little information known. The land came under the rule of twin gods, Makoto, Baal, and Beelzebul. Together, they defeated enemies like Orobashi, who was also defeated by Morax. This god cannot catch a break. During the Cataclysm, Makoto perished, and was left to rule in her sister's name. but that comes later. Unlike other nations, Sumeru's Archon War saw 3 gods, Rukkhadevata, King Deshret, and Nabu Malikata, peacefully coexisting, but the sands of time brought tragedy to the region. Deshret's refusal of Celestia's gifts and the eventual death of Nabu Malikata plunged the Great Red Sand into chaos. After the deaths of Deshret and Nabu Malikata, Rukkhadevata was named the sole Dendro Archon of Sumeru. After her death during the cataclysm, Lesser Lord Kusanali, Nahida, rose as her successor, though Rukkhadevata's rule would be obscured in history after she was wiped from the Irminsul during the Archon questline in Sumeru. Kind of like in Azuma, Fontaine's role in the war is very obscured in history, but it likely coincided with Remiria's conquest of Fontaine, led by the ambitious god King Remus, who sought to unite the land against prophesied disaster, rooted from Egeria using primordial seawater to give human form to Oceanids, which resulted in her getting locked away by Celestia's mysterious forces. Remus's campaign ended in ruin when his creation, Phobos, backfired and destroyed his civilization. Egeria, Fontaine's Hydro Archon, was tasked with restoring order, exiling criminals to the fortress of Meripede and cementing her rule. The nation of Natlan saw battles of legend, such as Xibalanque's triumph over the dragon Ziacotl, earning him the title of Pyro Archon. Unique among the nations, Natlan's Archons maintained human lifespans, passing their title like a sacred torch, with the last known Pyro Archon being Mavwika. And before you say, Will, you forgot Snezhnaya! At the time of making this iceberg, little to basically nothing is known about Snezhnaya's role in the Archon War, seeing as we have not quite gotten to that region yet, so if you're watching this in the future and Snezhnaya is already out, you may have to look into a different video for that information. But yeah, that's the Archon War. The only surviving Archons from that era are Morax and Barbados, every other Archon perishing and passing their role down to someone else. The Unknown God. The Unknown God is the character at the very beginning of the game who fights the 2 travelers and ultimately defeats and separates them. This entry won't be very long because, quite frankly, we know very little about this character at this point in the game, since they haven't appeared since. However, what we do know is that this character calls themselves the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, hinting that she is very likely one of the most powerful gods within the game's universe. Is she the embodiment of the Heavenly Principles, or just a devoted enforcer? No one really knows. It wouldn't be a big surprise if she ends up being an incredibly essential character towards the end of the game's story. She also likely had massive involvement with the fall of Khaenri'ah, since the cutscene depicting the fall of Khaenri'ah shows those same red cubes that were seen in the fight with the Travelers. Many theories surround the Unknown God's true identity, such as Paimon and Kiana from Honkai Impact 3rd, but we'll touch on this more later. Heavenly Principles, Primordial 1. The Heavenly Principles are the omnipotent rulers or ruler of Teyvat in Genshin Impact. Shrouded in mystery and steeped in divine authority, this godly entity, also known as the Primordial One, originates from beyond Teyvat. The Heavenly Principles holds the reins of both Celestia and the world's laws, dictating the natural order and the fate of its inhabitants. They've been silent since the cataclysm occurred 500 years before the game takes place, yet their influence looms large, sparking conflicts as groups like the Abyss Order and the Fatui seek to overthrow their celestial rule. Legend has it that the Heavenly Principles created the Gnosis, the chest-like tokens that symbolize their control over the Archons, which we talked about in Tier 1. These divine artifacts fuel the game's ever-escalating tensions, especially since the Archons themselves often chafe under the laws imposed on them. Even the Archon War, which we just talked about, is suggested to have been a celestial scheme orchestrated by the Heavenly Principles. The Heavenly Principles is practically connected to every major event within the history of Genshin Impact's world, so outlining the entire history of the Heavenly Principles would essentially be outlining the entire history of Teyvat, and that's just way too much to cover in one entry. We'll tackle the Heavenly Principles several times throughout this iceberg, and we'll cover each part of their history in different entries. However, one video I will definitely recommend for people who are interested in the origins of Teyvat and the Heavenly Principles is this video by YouTuber Dainsleif, called Ancient History of Teyvat, as it tells the ancient history of the Heavenly Principles quite concisely. 7 Sovereigns. Long before gods walked the lands of Teyvat, the world was ruled by mighty dragons. These colossal beings, known as the 7 Sovereigns, were each masters of one of the 7 elements and ruled over territories aligned with their elemental powers. At the head of this draconic order was the Dragon King Nibelung, a leader both feared and revered. The Sovereigns brought balance to their elemental domains. Apep, the Dendro Sovereign, nurtured vibrant forests teeming with ancient sentient dendro lifeforms. The Hydro Sovereign reigned over the primordial sea, the cradle of all life, where existence flowed as a collective rather than in separate beings. Each sovereign played a vital role in shaping the world according to their elemental affinities. This age of dragons came to a screeching halt with the arrival of the, you guessed it, heavenly principles. This mysterious force challenged the sovereign's rule and unleashed devastating battles to take control of the world. The sovereigns fought valiantly, with Nibelung leading the charge, but they were ultimately overpowered. Nibelung fled into the void, seeking forbidden knowledge to strike back. In his absence, the heavenly principles remade the world. Life no longer relied on the primordial sea, and humans were created 400 years after the heavenly principles arrived and defeated the sovereigns. The heavenly principles replaced the dragon's elemental authority with newly created gnosis, artifacts tied to the divine thrones of the Archons. Fueled by the forbidden knowledge he acquired, Nibelung waged a catastrophic war of vengeance against the heavenly principles. The sovereigns rallied under his banner one last time, with Apep and others joining the fight. The clash between dragons and the heavenly principles tore the world asunder. Entire civilizations fell, lush forests turned to lifeless desert, and the dragons were ultimately defeated. Nibelung's war left the heavenly principles severely weakened, yet the dragon's age had ended, marking the rise of a new order. In the aftermath, the sovereigns retreated into obscurity. Apep, bitter and disillusioned, withdrew to watch the new world in disdain. The Hydro Sovereign's power was scattered, and centuries later, the prophecy of a human-born Hydro Sovereign was fulfilled in Neuvillette, a mysterious figure unaware of his draconic heritage. Others, like Xiaotl, attempted to reclaim lost glory, but succumbed to corruption and destruction. The Sovereign's legacy, however, endured in fragments of their power, myths, and whispers of their return. In modern Teyvat, remnants of the Sovereign's influence still stir. Apep, the Dendro Sovereign, re-emerged during Lesser Lord Kusanali's quest, revealing the dragon's forgotten history. The Hydro Dragon's legacy still lives on in Neuvillette, the Chief Justice of Fontaine. Speculation about the remaining sovereigns runs rampant in the fandom, one common theory being that Azthaha is the Geo-Dragon Sovereign. Celestia. Celestia is the floating island that hangs above Teyvat and is the residence of the gods. We could just leave things here, but that wouldn't be any fun. As we mentioned before with visions, visions are handed out to the people of Teyvat who may be potential candidates of godhood ascension. The visions are distributed by the unknown forces from Celestia. The Archons can also resonate with Celestia directly through their gnosis, which solidify their status as an Archon and serve as a symbol of the heavenly principles' influence over Teyvat. Celestia is visible from most locations in Teyvat, and there's a lot of speculation that the Traveler is going to visit Celestia towards the endgame. There's also speculation that Celestia may crash into Teyvat, or that it's been completely abandoned by the gods, seeing as the heavenly principles have gone quiet since the cataclysm. Dainsleif. Dainsleif is a character in Genshin Impact who mainly shows up in interlude quests, which are quests that take place in between major story arcs, usually in between traveling different regions. Each interlude quest involves Dainsleif, and with each of these quests, you learn more and more about the secrets of Teyvat and Khaenri'ah. Dainsleif is a Khaenri'ah. In fact, he was the knight captain of the royal guard in Khaenri'ah. Dainsleif was unable to prevent the destruction of Khaenri'ah and was one of the pure-blooded Khaenri'ahs cursed with immortality. Dainsleif is a major source of lore within Genshin Impact, as he travels with the Traveler to learn more about the truths of Teyvat and the siblings' whereabouts. Dainsleif was also once the siblings' companion, but they split off due to unknown reasons, although it's likely because of ideological disagreements. Dainsleif is a confirmed playable character, but he has not been released yet, so that leads a lot of players to believe that he'll likely get released later in the endgame, and is a big reason why people speculate why we're probably going to be going to Khaenri'ah or Celestia. Old Mondstadt. Once upon a time, long before Mondstadt became the land of freedom and wine, it was ruled by Khaenri'ah, the god of storms. Around 2,600 to 3,000 years ago, there is a period of Mondstadt's history called the Age of Kings, where the god Khaenri'ah and Boreas battled for centuries. To shield the people of Old Mondstadt from the icy blizzards caused by his rival Boreas' powers, he wrapped his city in an impenetrable wind barrier. But while Khaenri'ah believed his winds were a loving embrace, his people saw them as a prison. Khaenri'ah saw himself as a benevolent protector. However, the people of Old Mondstadt viewed him as a tyrant. He dictated every aspect of their lives, from where they lived to what they could sing, banning even certain melodies he deemed rebellious. To him, their bowed heads were a symbol of adoration, but in truth, they bowed only to avoid being blasted by his ferocious winds. Ironically, Khaenri'ah quite literally had a love for his people, to the point where he even took on a human lover named Amos, but their romance was doomed. Amos realized he loved her as a ruler might love a prized possession, not as one human loves another. Disillusioned and trapped, the people's frustration brewed into rebellion. a group of brave freedom fighters began to plot his downfall. Among them were the Nameless Bard, a wind spirit, possibly the weak wind spirit later known as Barbados, Almos herself, a wandering red-haired warrior, and an unnamed knight. They rallied the people under the symbol of the Windbloom, a flower that symbolizes solidarity. Even the Gunhilder clan, once loyal subjects of Khaenri'ah, abandoned the city and joined the rebellion after finding refuge from the blizzards by a wind spirit, presumably the spirit who would later be known as Barbados, although this is not confirmed. Boreas, meanwhile, decided to bow out of the chaos. Concluding that his blizzards made life unbearable, he dissolved his physical form and let his powers flow into the land, ending the eternal winter. However, later on, Boreas became one of the four winds of Mondstadt and takes the form of Andreas, with the purpose of protecting the land provided by Animo Archon Barbados. Whether Khaenri'ah noticed his old rival's quiet exit is anyone's guess. The rebellion reached its climax and Khaenri'ah was slain by his people, and his death shattered part of his tower, dispelling the storm barrier. For the first time, the people of Mondstadt saw the blue sky and the world beyond their prison of wind. But the victory was bittersweet. Both Almos and the Nameless Bard perished in the struggle, their sacrifices paving the way for a new era. With Khaenri'ah gone, the wind spirit ascended as Barbados, the new Animo Archon. Taking the form of the Nameless Bard to honor his friend, Barbados led the people to a new land by Cider Lake, where the modern city of Mondstadt was built. Meanwhile, Khaenri'ah's old city was abandoned, left to crumble in ruin. Most of the ruins surrounding Mondstadt can be assumed to be part of Old Mondstadt. The main location of Old Mondstadt is now known as Storm Terror's lair, as it's where Storm Terror took refuge after the battle with Durin during the cataclysm. It's also where the Traveler, along with the Mondstadt crew, confront Storm Terror during the climax of Mondstadt's story. Regions based on real countries/cultures. We briefly have mentioned this in previous entries, but it should come to no surprise that Genshin's regions are inspired by real-world cultures and countries. There is still a slight amount of debate of exactly which region is based on what country or culture, but I'll go over each region and their supposed inspirations. Mondstadt is inspired primarily off of Germany, but it also contains broader European inspirations as well. Liyue is undeniably based on China and Chinese culture. Inazuma draws heavily from Japan, especially Edo period Japan. Sumeru is a region based on a blend of several different cultures from South Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, particular examples being Egypt and India. Fontaine is based off of France, although there's also elements of Italian and broader European culture. Natlan mainly pulls from Mesoamerican, South American, and West African cultures. Snezhnaya, although not released at the time of this video, seems to take heavy inspiration from Russia and other Slavic countries as well. Throughout the game, other cultural inspirations can be seen in some smaller parts of the game, which I'll elaborate on in the next entry. Historical and cultural influences in character design and lore. Along with world culture being a huge influence on Genshin's main regions, these same type of influences can be found in different aspects of the game, such as the character designs and lore. One major example of this is with the Fatui harbingers, as their lore and designs are reflective of the Commedia dell'arte, which is a popular form of theater in Italy, especially in Venice. Pretty much every character within Genshin Impact contains connections to real-world folklore and culture, whether it's in their design or in their backstories. Take a look at any character and you'll probably find something. Some examples are more obvious than others, such as Yunjin being a traditional Chinese opera singer being pretty much her main character trait. Some examples require a bit more research, such as Al-Haytham having connections to Ibn al-Haytham, a pioneering scientist in optics and mathematics. And as mentioned before, many of the characters in Natlan are referencing real-world deities such as Ororon. Point being, there are these types of influences around every corner in Genshin, and are pretty easy to notice if you're specifically looking for it. There's way too many specific examples to include in this one entry, but we'll definitely see these influences as we continue through this iceberg. Lantern Rite. Lantern Rite is a yearly festival that takes place in Liyue, and started with the version 1.3 update. Lantern Rite is essentially a Chinese New Year event, having a very similar vibe to lantern festivals that take place in the real world during Chinese New Year. Every year, Lantern Rite contains a main storyline, some minigames, and abundant awards to keep players engaged. One of the most notable minigames to come from Lantern Rite is Theater Mechanicus, which was sort of like a tower defense minigame. The popularity of this minigame allowed it to return a couple times, although it hasn't returned in years. Originally, this tradition of Lantern Rite began as a way to guide lost soldiers home, reminding them to stay true to themselves even in the chaos of war. But as the Archon War ended and Liyue entered an era of peace, the festival evolved into a tribute to those who gave their lives to protect the land. Over time, it became a full-blown celebration, blending solemn remembrance with joy and festivity. However, the festival isn't without its challenges. During this time, residual energy from gods who perished in the Archon War surges across the land, creating chaos that only Zhao, the vigilant conqueror of demons, can contain. While the people of Liyue release lanterns and enjoy the festivities, Zhao battles tirelessly in the shadows, ensuring the safety of the realm. Each year's Lantern Rite has provided a different perspective from different characters within the main story. For example, the first Lantern Rite was mainly showing Zhao's perspective, while 2024's was largely focused on the character Ga Ming. Dark Sea. The Dark Sea refers to the world that extends outside of the continent of Teyvat, which is out of the reach from the power of the 7 Archons. Don't be fooled by the name. The Dark Sea is not entirely aquatic. Instead, it includes vast and treacherous landmasses where ancient powers stir, and secrets best left undisturbed lie buried. In ages past, the Sealies, ethereal beings of beauty and wisdom, graced the lands now called the Dark Sea. They built grand palaces, though their splendor has long faded. These majestic halls now linger as haunted ruins in a wasteland, populated not by thriving civilizations, but by the ghostly remains of fallen gods. The Dark Sea became a grim refuge following the cataclysmic Archon War. Defeated gods, unwilling to live under the rule of the 7, fled here to carve out a semblance of freedom. But this freedom came at a cost. Over time, these exiled deities seemingly met their end, whether through strife, despair, or the harsh realities of their forsaken sanctuary. Now, their presence lingers only in the form of grotesque remnants, twisted echoes of their former selves. Not all regions of the Dark Sea are entirely unknown. However, beneath Watatsumi Island lies Enkanomiya, a subterranean city that predates even the 7. Speaking of which, Enkanomiya, Byakuya Koku. Enkanomiya is an explorable area that was released in version 2.4 of Genshin Impact. Enkanomiya is a fan-favorite area within the game due to the fact that it has extraordinary lore and is a pretty unique location within the game. Enkanomiya is located underneath Watatsumi Island in Inazuma, although it initially was not connected directly to Teyvat. Once part of a unified human civilization during the era of the Primordial One, Enkanomiya, previously named Byakuya Koku, was a flourishing land of knowledge and culture. However, disaster struck when the second who came waged war against the Primordial One, shattering the heavens and earth. Byakuya Koku, caught in the destruction, plummeted into the depths of the ocean, becoming severed from the surface world. In this watery abyss, its people were plunged into darkness. The people of Byakuya Koku found themselves threatened by the dragonaires of the depths, vicious, light-hating creatures now known as baptismal bishops. Desperate, the survivors lit thousands of lanterns to ward off the bishops. However, their methods proved rather ineffective. Reaching desperation, they sent their prayers to the Primordial One, and yet, their calls for help went unanswered, plummeting their people into a grim period called the Years of Darkness. After 3 agonizing years, salvation came in the form of Istaroth, the ruler of time and one of the Primordial One's 4 shades. Istaroth granted wisdom to a man named Aburaku, who led the people in building the Dainichi Mikoshi, a massive artificial sun that drove away the dragonaires and brought light to their dark world. With the Dainichi Mikoshi lighting their path, Byakuya Koku entered a new age, the Years of Moon and Sun. But peace was fleeting. A corrupt cabal of nobles twisted the worship of the Dainichi Mikoshi into a state religion and installed puppet rulers known as the Sun Children. These child rulers, manipulated by the cabal, plunged Byakuya Koku into tyranny. Aburaku, the visionary who had saved them, became a victim of their schemes, falsely accused of treason and imprisoned until death. Also, during this time, the people of Byakuya Koku had built the towers of the 3 realms on each border of the land, since it was on the border among 3 realms: the human realm, the light realm, and the void realm. 3 realms which we'll discuss further into the Iceberg. Despite small rebellions, the people endured under the oppressive rule of the Sun Children until a new savior emerged. Defeated in the Archon War, the god Orobashi no Mikoto, a serpent-like god, defeated by the Electro Archon and the Geo Archon, fled to Byakuya Koku and found its people suffering under the Sun Children and still haunted by the dragonaires. Taking pity on them, Orobashi overthrew the Sun Children and sealed away the bishops. From the corals growing on its body, Orobashi forged a path back to the surface, creating Watatsumi Island. The people, grateful for their salvation, named Orobashi their god and began calling the sacred land Enkanomiya, leaving behind its old name of Byakuya Koku. In Enkanomiya, Orobashi discovered the book Before Sun and Moon, which contained forbidden knowledge about Celestia and a prophecy foretelling the rebirth of the Dragon of Water, one of the ancient 7 sovereigns. Fearing the implications, Urabashi banned the book and began experimenting on the Dragonaires to prevent the prophecy from becoming true. Eventually, the people of Enkanomiya fled to the surface world of Watatsumi Island with their god Urabashi, who eventually died at the hands of the shogun after living with his own people and teaching them how to survive on the surface world. Though abandoned for centuries, Enkanomiya is far from forgotten. The region poses a recurring danger to Watatsumi Island, as its soil periodically bleaches, threatening to turn the island into a desert and unleashing monsters like the Dragonaires onto the surface. To combat this, the Watatsumi people conduct a ritual called Watatsumi Goryo Matsuri, involving jade coral branches harvested from Enkanomiya's depths. When the traveler ventures into Enkanomiya at Sangonomiya Kokomi's request, they uncover a web of ancient threats, including the Abyss Order, Bishop conspiracies, and the possible return of eternal darkness. The mysterious Sumi, revealed to be a bishop person, or as explained by Kokomi, possibly the last vassal of Watatsumi, a human-snake hybrid familiar of Urabashi, initially works with the traveler but ultimately warns of the bishop's inevitable return. Kokomi, learning the truth about the Blood Branch Coral, vows to find an alternative to these dangerous rituals to protect her people without further provoking the bishops.